Right. Well, awesome. Welcome to Market Newsflow today on Thursday, September 10th. This is session 5. So for first, let's do a recap of Wednesday's news, starting with Asia. We see that Kakao Games in Korea more than doubled its oversubscribed IPO. It was up a whopping 160% today. As well, they ended up ending the day at the daily permissible market limit of up 30%, which is still a pretty large amount given the IPO on the Cossack exchange. In addition, so Kakao Games is a subsidiary of a larger company called Kakao. This parent company was up a modest 40 basis points. This was a record-breaking IPO subscription, and that's why it's pretty significant. In addition, Yum China's Hong Kong IPO was another way for companies to access liquidity, given the constraints of the current environment. A lot of people want liquidity right now, which makes a lot of sense, and equity markets are pretty easy ways to get it. So despite the volatility, we've seen surges in IPO activity, particularly in exchanges like the HKEX, the HKEX, which is where we've seen both NetEase and the e-commerce firm JD.com list this year amid the circumstances. Another common trend that we've seen recently is by people creating SPACs, SPACs, which are different companies where it's not companies, but blank check corporations, where a big investor can put money on a public exchange and raise money quickly with the hope of doing an acquisition. And the idea behind doing an SPAC acquisition is that it is a lot less volatile in terms of coming to market, because when an IPO comes to market, you have a book of investor interest, which is the subscription level, but it's still a little bit up in the air given the environment, and especially because the VIX is trading so high. I think right now it's trading above 30. We see a lot of movement there. Yum China's IPO was not quite as nice as Kakao Games, with shares tumbling a little bit over 5%. Yum China is the parent company that operates fast food restaurants such as KFC, Taco Bell, and Pizza Hut in China. They raised $2.22 billion with these 42 million shares. Considering markets from Wednesday, we see that the mortgage rate on the 30-year is down to 2.86%. This is incredibly low given circumstances. This is one of the reasons that we've seen the New York Fed doing their agency MBS purchases below the money. So we've seen them buying like their 2% coupon and the 2.5% coupon of these agency MBS. So we've seen skyrocketing CPR and SMM rates, which are things that are used in mortgage-backed securities to describe the rate of prepayment. Put simply, prepayment is bad for mortgage-backed securities. And when we see refinancing, that's just another way that we're seeing prepayment. And because of such low mortgage rates, we see increased refinancing activity, or at least increasing demand for refinancing activity, which is one of the reasons that we've seen growth in the profits of loan originators through this process. This has been especially reflected in agency MBS because you have a pool of a lot of mortgages, and mortgages are now being taken out of the pool, which means cash flows are going to be lower, which is bad for the people that hold the agency MBS or hold the security and the certificate that comes from it. In addition, just to go to the broader markets, we saw the Dow up 1.5%, the S&P 500 up to 3,400 points, which was a 2% rise, and the NASDAQ up nearly 3%, which was a huge rebound. Because if we go back to our last couple sessions, we've seen a huge theme of poor performance in tech. Today was one of the 4 out of the last 5 days that we've seen a fall in tech. So yet again, on Wednesday, we saw a stark rebound. In today's markets, that was not continued. Considering a specific deal, we see that Louis Vuitton, the LVMH parent company, has pulled out of their deal with Tiffany. This was a $16.2 billion deal that was agreed last November, which notably, as you guys all know, was pre-COVID. So in a different world, they agreed to this $16.2 billion deal. But for a variety of reasons, most predominantly Tiffany's revenue being down a whopping 44% with regard to same-store sales. And LVMH is being sued for $575 million in damages because once you commit to doing a deal, you have huge breakout fees if you decide to annul that contract. Another thing to consider there is that there is a newly proposed United States tariff on these French cosmetics companies more broadly, which also would include handbags. This is another thing that LVMH will have to probably deal with if this does go through the legislative process in the United States. This becomes the third deal that has been annulled because of COVID, with Simon backing out of buying another mall owner, Tubman and Sycamore pulling out of purchasing Victoria's Secret, which created a whole messy situation as well. To touch on one more thing from Wednesday's news story, we saw that JCPenney had a rescue deal with a $1.75 billion transaction that retains about 70,000 jobs and provides $300 million of equity investment by the landlords. This was a pretty interesting deal because some banks that typically don't do restructuring advisory, like Deutsche Bank, were actually able to get involved in an advisory seat due to their position in the cap stack. Considering some themes to watch, I'd like to first start out with the headline story of the day: jobless claims. Jobless claims were worse than feared and failed to decline to the expected 750,000 and resulted at the 884,000 job level. This is about in par with what we saw last week, also in the 880s. I believe it was 881, if I'm not mistaken. So we still see a lot of people losing their jobs. This is a pretty large number with respect to historical precedent and historical moving averages. Considering TikTok, this is something that's made a lot of headlines just because of how pertinent it is to our generation. The TikTok United States division sale deadline will not be extended according to the Trump regime, and selling is considered to be highly urgent. ByteDance, the parent company, wanted more time, and on Wednesday came out publicly saying that they did see a need for having more time. However, the federal government has decided that they will not be granting this permission, and the Trump administration holds that position relatively strongly. China's in a bit of hot water right now on many fronts with the situation between China and India in the Himalayas, the situation with them expanding their naval bases in the the South China Sea, and throughout the southernmost portions of Southeast Asia. In addition, there's a whole question of absolutely heinous human rights violations that are happening with the Muslim race within China in the Xinjiang province in mainland China, which is another issue to watch. Various numbers have been quoted with the number of deaths, the number of hostile actions that have been taken, and this is one of the reasons that people in the U.S. have started boycotting different producers, different end goods that were actually produced in this region. This region is known for their production of cotton, so it is involved in a lot of the textile production that makes clothes that say made in China. Considering Plantier Direct, they have hired Citadel Securities to do a direct listing. Citadel is pretty famous for a lot of reasons. Their founder, Ken Griffin, is an absolute visionary, has their buy side fund, but also has their sell side shop as well. Their buy side fund is very quantitative, and their sell side initiative is market making. They're one of the lead market makers for the New York Stock Exchange, the NYSE, and they're considered to be an absolute beast in the industry. They are facing a challenge with the volatility in the market because doing a direct listing, the benefit is obviously you're saving the book building fees that an equity capital markets team would take in an IPO process, but you are making yourself exposed to the volatility of the market and not knowing where investors would stand. Because in an IPO, you have orders when you build the book that tell the price, and you get and there's a specific term for it, but you get some idea of what the price is going to look like when you go to market. When you do a direct listing and boycott that process, sure, you're saving the fees, which is great on the surface, but you are becoming exposed to that volatility, which could be problematic, especially in this heightened volatility environment. Citadel had done Spotify and Slack and is now contracted to do Asana in the future as well. So we've seen them work with a lot of big names. Citadel is the leader. If you want to do a direct listing, they're definitely a top choice. So it makes sense that Plantier is choosing them. Private investors have valued the company around $20 billion, but PitchBook Research valued around $9 billion. Obviously, that's a huge discrepancy, and one of the things that'll probably come to light once the equity starts trading on the market. To touch on the last thing on the slide, we see Brexit as a major issue. Brexit, Boris Johnson has planned to rewrite parts of the previous deal, and I don't want to get into too much detail now, but there's a lot to watch here in the sense that there could be a no-deal Brexit where the United Kingdom decides to leave the European Union, but not necessarily provide any detail on what next steps will actually look like, which creates a huge problematic situation. The no deal is becoming more and more likely as this process draws on, with a start deadline on October 15th. So with the days counting down, that's definitely something to watch and stay tuned to. On the left of your screen, as usual, you can see market performance. In addition, one more thing that I'd like to mention is Christine Lagarde, the head of the ECB, spoke today in a broadly broadcast news conference and said that ample stimulus is very much needed to support the recovery. With her comments in mind, gold had pushed higher, and optimism thus triggered this euro rally to a 6-month high versus the British pound. Another, leading causation of that movement is that Brexit disparity, because we have all this uncertainty of what's going to happen to Britain, what's going to happen to their trade. Sure, we'll see increased employment because people need to be customs agents if the European Union, which is the biggest market into which the United Kingdom sells its goods, now needs this extra layer of customs protection. But the question becomes, what's going to be the effect on the economy? And this state of uncertainty that we're living in right now is not a great spot to be in and has caused weakness in the pound. So the euro strengthened across the board really as well. And although the ECB discussed the relative strength of the euro, they do not target an exchange rate. And Lagarde made an explicit point to say that she's not going to target the exchange rate and does not see that as a place for her policy to go. Their version of fiscal stimulus in the European Union is dubbed the PEPP program. This is likely to be fully used and maxed out. She also did mention that they're revising up their core inflation projections. To move on, the biggest thing that we see today is that we are breaking the glass ceiling. And I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this as personally a woman going into finance, but also a big movement for the industry as a whole. Considering Jane Fraser from Citibank, she's going to be the head of Citi entirely in February 2021. Michael Corbat announced that he'll be stepping down, and he's only 60 years old, so that's pretty young for a CEO to be stepping down. However, Jane Fraser, who's the president of all of Citi and the CEO of Global Consumer Banking, will be elected to the board immediately and will take over full reins in February 2021. This is particularly amazing because she's the first woman CEO of a major global investment bank. So this is very exciting. For a little bit of background on her, she is Scottish born, worked at Goldman Sachs in mergers and acquisitions to start her career after attending Cambridge for undergrad, then went back to business school at Harvard, worked at McKinsey for a whopping 10 years, then went back to banking, led Citi Mortgage, led Citi Latin America, and has spent a total of 15 years at the bank. She's been dubbed a rising star by people across the street, including being ranked #1 in American Bankers magazine of Woman to Watch. So Michael Corbat had worked there for 37 years. He had held the top job for 8 years, obviously all of which were post-crisis. And Jane Fraser will take the reins, which is very exciting to see. So we'll look forward to that in February. Being on the board now, she'll start to garner a little bit more perspective that should ease the transition. That should be it. Look forward to seeing you on Monday. Just looking to head to tomorrow. In the meantime, Asia futures are about flat. Just looking up on my screen right now. That looks about right. So things are a little bit bullish. We're up about 0.1%, 0.2% across the board. And the S&P E-minis, which is the futures contracts that represent the S&P 500, are up about, 15 basis points now. So pretty much flat, not much to see there, and it'll be interesting to watch, and we'll have more information on Monday as things unravel. So with that in mind, I would love to open it up to questions. If anyone would like to just unmute themselves and hop on, please do. if you'd rather send your messages in the chat, that works too. And all right. I'll turn off the recording then if nobody has any questions that they'd like to broadcast, and then if anyone has anything else.